much. All right, well, welcome everybody to our Knox County January 7th, 2021 Records Commission meeting. I think our last meeting was in January, face-to-face meeting was in January of 2020. And so I am glad to have everybody back here and get this started up again. We are now have Commissioner Beeler as a member of this commission. The commission is required to be maintained by the county by state law. There are 3 seats that are designated, that there must be a member of the judiciary, which is the role that I serve. There must be a member of county commission, and there and then there must be, let's see, who am I missing here? 3 members, 1 judge, and the courts of record. And then we have the county clerk, the county register, and if we have a county historian, which had been the role that Doris had served until she retired last year. So why don't we go around? Sherry, can we start with you? Would you introduce yourself and what your role and title is?
I'm Sherry Witt and Knox County Clerk.
All right, Nick?
Nick McBride, Knox County Register of Deeds.
All right, Steve, would you introduce yourself, particularly to Commissioner Beeler?
Steve Cottom, I'm the head of the McClung Historical Collection at East Tennessee History Center.
So he's our historian for purposes of this meeting that kind of keeps us on how these records are used. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm the Knox County Records Manager, Jeff Bills, though I'm not actually a member of the board.
Jeff takes our minutes and makes sure that we get organized. And if you haven't, Commissioner Beeler, taken a tour of the facility that they operate, I would strongly encourage you to do that at some point in time. I think it's really helpful to kind of understand how things work. It was certainly helpful for me. Then also in the call, we have Zach Webb. Zach, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Judge. Yes, please. I'm Zach Webb. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Mayor Jacobs.
All right. And then also joining us today, Kevin Parton.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Kevin Parton. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Health Department.
All right. Kathy Olson. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm the Director of Strategic Planning for Engineering and Public Works.
All right. And then I also see is Mr. Morton on the call?
Yes, Your Honor. Myers Morton Law Director's office.
All right. And then Rob Link, also from Zach's office, is on the call. So let's start. And Commissioner Beeler, at any time, if you have any questions, I know the first time I took a seat on this commission, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of people start talking about CTAS and tax, and I don't know what they're talking about. So if anytime there's an acronym or name or some procedure that you're unsure of, please let us know so that we can make sure everybody's on board with what we're doing. I think I've got all my documents here, but let me make sure So our first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the January 6th meeting, which Mr. Beals has sent out to everybody. Has everybody had a chance to look at those?
I have, and I move for their approval. I did have one question. Was Sherry Witt, the county clerk, not at that meeting? I couldn't remember. It's been a year, and I noticed the minutes reflected that she wasn't there, but
I looked at the same thing, Nick, and I really cannot remember. I can't imagine. I thought I'd made all of them, but maybe not.
It was a meeting in the courtroom.
Yeah.
It would have been the meeting where Doris announced that she was retiring.
And we were meeting in the courtroom here in Circuit Court 3 because we had a lot of people at the meeting, as I recall.
Forgive my memory. I don't.
All right. Well, we'll presume Jeff's been pretty accurate. We'll presume that you were not there at that time. And
Move for
with that,
approval.
Nick,
One
have you?
second.
All right, I got a second. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes from January 6, 2020, say aye. Aye. All right. Then our next item is a records disposition request. And that comes from Records Management. You should have received a printout or an email copy that looks like this. Jeff, why don't you for a second kind of just walk us through what, when we get this, what is this supposed to mean to us so that Commissioner Beeler is aware of what this document represents?
Basically, what you have there, what we do is we store the records here. Records have a certain retention time. At the end of their retention, I put together a list which gives the record type, what date range it covers, how many, the quantity, and the legal justification for that retention time. So that gets sent out to the members, and then they vote on it. And then in such time when everybody's been notified, the records are then destroyed.
All right, and so the reference to, for example, on this disposition where it says CTAS 15005 is the County Technical Advisory Services code or their designation of what that particular document type is and what the retention policy is. There are certain documents that have a mandatory indefinite lifespan, but these are set out specifically as having lifespans of, it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, it may be 7 years, after which time they can be destroyed. Has everybody had a chance to look through the disposition request that Jeff sent out earlier?
I have, Madam Chair. I've got something that I would like to add to the list, and then I've got a question about one item, please.
All right.
If I may, I would like to add the Register of Deeds, that we add scanned submitted checks from October of 2019 through October of 2020. I move that that be added.
All right, hold on a second. So do you don't have any in here right now, do you?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay, all right. So I don't need to,
Just
we're
to
just gonna
cover
add,
your back, Your Honor.
pardon?
This is just to cover your backside.
I understand. I understand. This is part of that discussion we had last year, as
Yes,
I
ma'am.
recall. So the issue was that now the way the banking services are provided, we don't really get the return checks from the bank. We just get an electronic statement that tells us what those deposits were, that your office's checks. And so the checks are scanned in, but once they're deposited, there's really no reason to keep the physical hard copy scanned check. And so that's what we're adding. And what was the time period, Mr. McBride?
October 2019 through October of 2020.
All right. And does anybody have any objection to that addition to the disposition? All right. So with that addition, are there any other questions? Nick, you said you had another question.
I had one question under human resources, under the 7-year retention, terminated employee files.
Yes.
Employee files for 2009. I was just kind of curious as why there were only 2.
Because we had destroyed some earlier and these were in with them. So I pulled them out and held them until the retention time was up. So they were a part of a bigger group, but there were only 2 that need to be held back.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would have thought there'd have been a lot more.
there
Okay.
were, but that time already been approved.
Gotcha.
So these records, so these were employee files that were terminated in 2009. There's a 7-year retention period, which would take us to sometime in 2016, 2017, and we're now entering into 2021. And the request is to terminate those 2 files. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes, and I'm now that he mentions it, that date might be from the previous ones, and these should be 2013.
All right.
So thanks for catching that, Nick. That's why that sticks out like that.
Okay. So you had 2009 files and you found these 2013
Yeah.
files in it. Okay. So
Yeah.
now they meet the retention requirement. All right.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
we would amend this disposition authorization for under human resources, terminate employees. That should say 2 employee files, 2013.
That's correct.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve this disposition as amended?
So moved.
All right. Sherry moved. Of a second.
Second.
All right. Commissioner Miller, second.
Your Honor, pardon me, it's Myers, Morton.
Yes, sir.
I understand the open meetings requirements for electronic meetings. Votes are required to be by roll call vote.
All right.
Right.
Thank you, sir. I forget when we have everybody's face on the camera that it seems to be redundant to do it by roll call, but we will go ahead and do it by roll call. All right, so let me back up. We had a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Let me do a roll call. Sherry Witt,
Okay.
Nick McBride,
Aye.
Richie Beeler,
Aye.
Zach Webb,
Muted, sorry, aye.
and Debbie Stevens, aye. All right. And then I have a motion and a second to approve the disposition request. Sherry Witt,
Aye.
Nick McBride,
Aye.
Richie Beeler,
Aye.
Zach Webb,
Aye.
and Debbie Stevens, aye.
What about Steve? We don't need his.
Oh, Steve went off my screen. I'm sorry. Steve, are you there?
I am. I've always understood I'm a non-voting member. I don't
Sorry,
know.
I couldn't remember.
All right.
So did Steve vote?
He did not. He's a non-voting member. Let me double check that. I thought all ex officio.
I thought
members-
everybody was a voting member.
County historian. Steve, are you the county historian?
I am.
All right, yes, you are an ex officio member. And then
Yeah.
under 10.7401, ex officio members, do vote.
Yeah.
All right, so Steve, your vote on the disposition?
Aye.
All right,
And he needs to vote on that first one too, I guess.
Steve on approving the minutes?
Aye.
All right. All right, Mr. Morton, have we done everything we need to do at this point?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right. Then we have, under our new business, we have 2 we oftentimes get requests from the various county departments. This commission doesn't really make any policy, but we often get requests for us to make some determinations about how records requests and records retentions and what records may or may not apply to a document retention policy. So that's why we have Kevin Parton and Kathy Olson here. Kevin, I don't know what your list of items looks like. I know Kathy had some questions that were going to require some, or may require some discussion. So I'm going to go first with Kevin and see what your issues and what you would like to have addressed.
Yes, ma'am. We have various departments inside the health department. This one would address the financial side of our business and our contracts and grant contracts. I posed the question to Mr. Morton of whether it would be okay for us to store our executed contracts electronically rather than via paper or bookshelves or things of that nature. And he asked if we had a written records policy, and I could not find one in my search through everything. And he then directed me to Mr. Bills, who then brought us here.
All right. So I'm assuming that you, as you said, you have confirmed that you do not currently have a written policy.
Not one that I could locate.
All right. So Mr. Morton, you have anything you want to add to that subject?
No, Your Honor. I understand under the rules of evidence, if the original is destroyed appropriately, and a copy or a duplicate can be entered into evidence. So I have no problem with it, Your Honor.
All right. The question, I think, is that I think you're absolutely correct that the health department would have to have a policy on taking their contracts and scanning them in, and then as a matter of policy, the electronically stored copy becomes the official record for the health department. So that would seem to go back to, I guess, the Board of Health, or however the health department adopts their policies, would need to go back to them for that policy. But from our perspective, I think we had maybe, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, probably a year or so, we had a discussion about the health department and the recordings of meetings and how they were stored. And again, it falls back to what your policy is. So however you all feel comfortable adopting a policy, I think you can certainly adopt a policy. Now that brings us back to our issue that we have faced and are probably going to face in 2021, which is how do we ensure, particularly as it relates to permanent records, accessibility to electronically stored documents. I know that's one of those questions that makes Zach pull his hair out. But with regard to the contracts, in and of itself, just keeping or using the electronic storage, I don't think this committee, and I think there's nothing in the CTAS documents that prevents us from using electronic records. The question you have is if that document needs to be stored for an indefinite period of time, how do we know that we're going to be able to access it if we're on operating system XYZ instead of OS 10 or Microsoft or Word, or we've switched completely different. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we operated computers on Unix systems and DOS systems that nobody thinks about now, but how would we access those records? I would just strongly suggest that you all have a conversation with the IT department about making sure that those records remain accessible for their lifetime. And if that's an indefinite period of time, then that becomes more of a challenge. Has anybody got any additional thoughts they want to add to that to provide to Mr. Parton?
I just want to point out that he was asking, Kevin was asking about grants as well. So grants and contracts. I don't know if he mentioned that, but he sent me an email earlier. And so
Yes.
those both items he's referring to.
Mr. McBride?
Kevin, are these contracts and grants that are executed by the mayor or executed by the health department?
They're all executed by the mayor.
So if they're executed by the mayor, then the law department has a record, I would assume. And I would assume that the county clerk has a record because commission probably had to approve it. So do you have a copy or do you have the original? Are we talking about a fourth or fifth duplication of a record, I guess, is
We
what
are.
I'm trying to get at.
I'm sorry. Yes, we're talking about the eventual fully executed copy of the document. The one that goes to county commission and the one that seeks the mayor's signature, neither one have been countersigned typically, especially when we talk about grants by the Department of Health or whoever the grantor is. So first I have to get the mayor's signature along with the law departments, and then I have to send that to, say, the Department of Health, and they send me back an electronic version that is fully executed. So I'm speaking to the fully executed versions.
So then does the fully executed document reside in the law director's office or in the county clerk, or does the county clerk not have a fully executed copy? I don't know how the county does their contracts. I'm sorry. I just know in many cases, we'll have 6 or 8 copies of one document in different departments in the courthouse.
Right. To my knowledge, the county clerk does not. I forward my fully executed versions back to the law office. So I have a copy, and then the law office would have a copy as well.
That's right. We do not have a copy.
So my question would be for the board or just in general discussion, and maybe this is for the law department. Maybe the greater question is, where does the official copy reside? Who is responsible for retaining the actual copy of a contract?
Well, I'm not sure, this is Myers, I'm not sure 100% of the time we get the final executed copy back once the Tennessee Department of Health signs off and get it back. Sometimes we don't get all of them. As the official depository for all contracts, I'm not sure the answer to that, Zach.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough, because we deal with a fair amount of contracts too, and I think I agree with Kevin that sometimes like we get it executed by the mayor, which is usually the end of the road, and then it may or may not make it back. We always try to do that, but I think maybe that should be something we sort out of who is the holder of the official contract, and then we can refine it from there.
Yeah, maybe the law director can shed some light on that, and maybe a policy can be put in place. I would think either the county clerk or the law director should be the ultimate holder or caretaker, and probably the county clerk, because those records aren't destroyed, are they, Madam Clerk, ever? I mean, there's always a record, right?
All of ours are permanent record.
Also, this is Myers again. I want to add contracts that are renewed that the county commission has previously approved do not necessarily go back to county commission for approval. The county commission's already approved it previously. They don't see it again.
That's right. That's right.
Occasionally.
So Kevin, if I understood what you were saying, though, the countersigned contract that you received, you only receive back in an electronic format.
That is correct.
So storing that, I don't think there's anything that requires you to convert it to hard copy and store it in that fashion. I think that by definition, if you receive the countersigned copy by electronic filing, the electronic filing is your record.
Okay.
Myers, would you disagree with that?
Not at all, Your Honor. However, there are contracts that are not electronically signed. Kevin's helped me learn about the Tennessee law on electronic signatures. And some of them are not done that way, right, Kevin?
That is accurate, depending upon the department inside the Department of Health. Some of them are electronically signed and some of them are still hand signed, and then forwarded back. A scanned copy is forwarded back to us.
But if it's hand signed, are they forwarded to you in an electronic format, or are they hard copied back to you?
Just the electronic format. I never.
Yeah, so regardless of how the state executes it, the manner in which you receive the countersigned final version of the contract is an electronic record
It is, yes.
in its natural state.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that, now when you're talking about, I don't know what the volume that you're talking about, but if all of the documents that you receive countersigned, whether they're contracts or grants, are returned in an electronic format, the electronic format would be your natural format. And that would be the only way it needs to be stored.
Okay.
But if you receive a hard copy, then you're back to having to adopt a policy
Right.
that would say that your electronic record is a final record. And then I think I would agree that one of the things, Commissioner Baylor, just for your benefit, the last, back before COVID started, which seems like 110 years ago now, we had a meeting to talk about electronic records, and they are somewhat of a nightmare. I think if you read the county and the state position on electronic filing, you read the National Archives, they all talk about it's the preferred method, but it's not preferred because we don't know how you maintain it permanently, and so you're left with this issue. So the county is trying to, we were trying to develop a committee to study this. And I'm actually talked to Mayor Jacobs a month or two ago about that issue and how we needed to go about getting, whether it needed to be a subcommittee of this group or whether it needed to be a separately appointed committee to address that. Myers, has the mayor talked to anyone in the law department about that issue?
Not me, but that doesn't mean anything, Judge.
All right, fair enough. So that's something we hope to have on our agenda for 2021, is to really look at this issue. Ultimately, would have to come back to county commission if we adopt some kind of an electronic records policy. And so your participation in this and your ability to communicate it to commission would really be important. But, you're starting to get at a flavor of the issues that we run into with how we receive documents and what we consider the original copy versus what we consider the hard copy. It was a lot easier when we just dealt with carbon paper.
Well, yes, in some ways it was. There's a lot more of it, though.
That's exactly right. All right. So Mr. Parton, have we answered your questions?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
All right. And then Myers, if at some point in time, as we move forward with this electronic records discussion, we ought to have a discussion that ought to include a discussion with the legal department about where and how we may make sure that the official copy of any contract is maintained.
I've made notes, Your Honor. I will diligently inquire and do some research.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Kevin, we're happy to have you stay on board, but if you want to jump off, we certainly understand. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Kathy Olson. Kathy, hey, Kathy participated in our meeting that we had in January, where we first started this discussion about electronic records. And I think she's kind of trying to stay on top of it for public records and is probably more aware of the morass that is created than most people. So Kathy, I know you have quite a few questions, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm actually in Colorado at the moment, so my bandwidth is a little low. So I sent an email through Jeff to everybody that kind of outlined, in the first email, there were 4 questions. And I'm hoping to get some kind of indication from the commission about how to proceed. And perhaps the next step for our department is to prepare a records retention policy that can be, I guess, discussed and approved, hopefully by the commission, perhaps in the next meeting or the next one after that. So the first question I have is related to building codes plans and permit applications. So there is a section of CTAS records retention schedule that deals with building inspection and similar reports. And this is for non-county owned development. So this is just your average building permit that would happen in the county. So those are required to be retained for 5 years after the issuance of a certificate of occupancy or final inspection. And we receive these currently as digital files. So we've got an application online where people can fill out the information relating to the permit and upload supporting documents such as building plans, contractor's license, workers' compensation proof, and all those kind of documents. So we are at the moment receiving all of this through an electronic portal. We have everything scanned so that our plan reviewers can mark those up and approve them. And what we're doing is we are printing them out, I think perhaps 2 years after they've been received, or some period of time after they've been received. We print them out, we attach the documents, and we send them to Jeff Beals at Records Management to be retained for a period of 5 years, and then they get destroyed. Are we able to designate these as digital records and avoid printing and sending them over to Records Management?
So if I understand your question, so at least if I'm understanding what you've said, is you receive the files in a digital format. Your office
Yes.
works with the files and makes notations that are maintained digitally. And then it's only
Yes.
for purposes of, at some point in time, is it, what did you say? Is it 2 years after the issuance, or what's the 2-year period?
Jeff, do you happen to remember that period of time? I think it's 2 years after the C, or perhaps it's 2 years after the file's been created, because I think you get a year's worth of information from our offices.
What record are you referring to specifically?
The subdivision records.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, that's an old retention from our Knox County retention schedule, because back when I was trying to figure out how long we had to keep those, it seemed like everybody in the state had a different approach to it. So the only reference I found to it was the old Knox County retention schedule. So if you're talking about the printouts to the like a commercial plan, is that what?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So those
Both commercial and residential.
and the residential. So what we've been doing is we've scanned all those going back to 1984 when the codes first started. So that's how we've been dealing with those. We've been converting them for the last 10 years, I guess, into digital format. And when they send them to us now, we do the same. So
Well, that seems to me then we're kind of being redundant or maybe we are overlapping ourselves, because if I understood what Kathy's saying is they keep and maintain the file electronically, but then they print it out and store it and send it to you, and then you scan it in to maintain it electronically, if that's what I'm understanding you all have just said.
yeah, I mean, if we get a paper plan we scan it. So I don't know how they received it. When we receive it, it's paper, you know, and it's got certain stamps on it of approval. So if it was entered in digitally, I don't know how the approval process works, whether that could still be, if it's still noted on there. All those are Kathy questions. We just, like I say, scan the paper copies that are sent to us.
So Myers, are you on the line here?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so it would seem to me that if what Public Works is doing is now receiving all of their applications for permitting electronically, that the person who is submitting them is submitting both the application and all attachments electronically. And then if the Public Works engineering people are using the file electronically and making their notes and making their final stamping on the electronic record, that the electronic record is the official record.
That makes sense, Your Honor.
It doesn't seem to me that they would need then to hard copy it to send it to Jeff so that he could scan it in to have an electronic file.
And the question comes, the same question is what is being done to preserve the electronic file?
Right, that's a different issue.
But that you're correct, Your Honor.
All right. Kathy, am I correct on what I'm hearing you say? Is that all works, all stamping, any
Yes.
any
Yes.
markings?
So
that
we
have to
do,
be
we
made?
do all of our, sorry.
That's all right, go ahead.
Yes, we do all of our marking up and stamping using Adobe. So it's all, they're all locked in Adobe, but all of our plans reviews are stamped on the PDF. They're not, we don't have physical stamps.
And then they're retained for 5 years after the certificate of occupancy
Yes.
or the inspection is issued. All right,
Yes.
so Zach, does that cause you any heartburn
No, it does not.
on a 5-year policy?
No, it does not. I mean, obviously, you start talking about retention time, there's cost associated with that. But I think that's reasonable. You know, when you start talking about things like, I cringe at the forever, forever, because again, those costs, and as especially since we're migrating to the cloud and storage as a service, every byte is a cost. And you got the cost of the storage and the cost of the backup. But I think that's all reasonable. And as long as we are in communication, if you expect, okay, now we're going to start scanning, I don't know, high res HD video of every, I don't know, bird sighting in Knox County, and that's going to have to be archived indefinitely. If you start doing drastic changes in what you're doing, and it's not just digital documents or PDFs, then yes, we will have a problem. But I think as it sits, it's reasonable.
All right. Any other questions or concerns you would like to address to Kathy? So Kathy, it would seem to me that based upon our discussions then that the policy that needs to be adopted is the fact that you all are only accepting applications electronically and that all notes and all markings and all approval stamps are maintained electronically. Then that is the electronic record can be the official record, and then there wouldn't be any need to transmit a hard copy. Then the question becomes, do you store the 5 years of electronic records, or do they go somewhere else for storage? And I would assume that we need to have some.
I'm sorry, there's a bit
That's
of a
all right,
delay
just to
here.
say
and I
that
keep talking
I'm
to
assuming
you.
we have to have some redundancy to maintain that record.
Our plan would be to use the document management system going forward that Zach's team has developed for us. So they are actually helping us to build the permit application portal. All of the information would come through and be stored in our work order permitting system called Cartograph. The attachments would stay in the document management system that is supported and maintained by Zach's team.
Yeah, and Judge, and I would like to add a point to that is that, you know, we're happy to do that. I just want to be careful that we understand, or the departments understand, that the cost of that will be passed to the department, if that makes sense. So you guys can maintain and store whatever you need, but that cost is one way, shape, or form passed back to that department, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess my bigger concern would be that if the electronic record is now maintained in some mechanism that the IT department has created, is there also a redundancy in that system so that there's some offsite storage or a backup in the event that the system crashes?
Yes, absolutely. And we can provide documentation to that if needed. But yes, absolutely, Your Honor.
So I would think that would need to be part of your policy, Kathy, that that where that electronic record is going to be stored and the assurance that there is a backup of that storage.
Okay, great. I'll work with Zach on that. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, that's no problem. And just so we know, any file storage that we have that isn't local to the system, all is under that records, the retention policy that we have, storage retention policy. So all of that is there, and we're happy to provide any of that information if need be.
All right, Myers, does that meet all the law department needs?
As far as I'm aware, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, Your Honor.
That's all right. All right. Any other questions about that particular issue?
Probably the only concern that I might see is that you may have a director that just doesn't want to pay for the storage of records, and then we just start seeing a wholesale deletion of records.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
I'm not sure how to handle that either, because I mean, again, it's something that obviously we start talking about budget dollars, and some of this stuff is, you know, pretty small. But if you're talking about like your office, Nick, you got a lot of records. If you just said that, hey, I'm out, I'm not doing it anymore, I don't know what we do at that point. I guess it would be, I don't know. I'm not sure how that would be handled.
I would hope they check with our office first.
we love for you to be the eternal optimist, Myers. But I do think that's why you need to have a written policy, that policy is that the record is maintained electronically, that it is stored with the IT department at the expense of the department, and that any other change in policy would have to come back to this commission. I don't know how else we protect ourselves.
I don't know either. And Myers, you may be able to answer this. I know years ago, there was an apartment complex in West Knoxville where we had a terrible flood, and it took out a building or two. And I think the county was relieved of liability because the county could go back to their records and say, well, we told them to do this, 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 and this. And I think that saved the county millions of dollars in liability. And so, you know, I guess there's a question, you know, I like that those records are there back to 84. I mean, but I mean, I think there's some value there to have those records to support the county and their decisions. So I don't know what the happy medium is there. Just a thought.
Well, my first reaction is sovereign immunity. But under the circumstances, I don't know the facts of about the flood in 84, but and I'm not sure what the question is of me. I'm sorry.
It just seems if you have the records, then the law department has more to cover their backside on the county engineering department side.
You are absolutely correct.
And so being able to cover your backside may be a lot more valuable than a department head saving $100 and not keeping a record, I guess is my point. Just a thought.
Well, and depending on the circumstances, there's different statutes, limitations, and deadlines for people to file certain types of suits, but you're correct.
All right, so Kathy, does that give you sufficient direction for you to be able to work with Zach and create a written policy that I would assume at some point in time you will run by the law department?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, very good. What's your next question?
Okay, the next three questions relate to Board of Zoning Appeals, and I guess there would be some questions I have for perhaps the clerk's office.
Yes.
So we have, I believe the county clerk is the official custodian of the minutes for the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there is an item in the CTAS records retention schedules 19-001 regarding Board of Zoning Appeals actions. So I was wondering whether the county clerk would be the official custodian for those BZA appeal actions.
Yes, we are.
Great. Okay, and then the next question is, for the minutes of the commission and board, would this cover the attachments to the minutes, such as documents to be adjudicated on? For example, there are two different retention periods that I found. One was 19-002 that states the attachments be retained for 1 year after application. But 19-004 states that all minutes of commissions and boards are considered permanent record.
That's what we adhere to.
Perhaps that,
Kathy, that's what we adhere to is the
okay.
19-004. All minutes of commission and boards are considered permanent records. So yes, and the answer to that is yes, we do.
Thank you. And the fourth question was, who is responsible for making the Board of Zoning Appeals records available to the public for inspection? And is there a requirement for the records to be readily available? So we currently retain a copy of all of our Board of Zoning Appeal packets that contain records of communication between the appellant and our office. Some of those records do not go over to the county clerk. They're not included in the packet. Should we be sending all of that information over? Should we be retaining copies to make available to the public? I'm a little confused about the responsibility of our office under that.
What our thoughts of that is only what's going before the board that will be voted on is what we think that we should retain for our permanent records. Okay. And that will go to the clerk's office in the commission library.
Okay, thank you. And then the public would be able to go to the commission library to obtain those records for inspection?
Yes, they would be able to do that there.
Thank you very much. That was very quick. The other questions I have were contained in a different email. Let me see here. And they relate more to the subdivision records. So the things that we've been talking about up to this point are related to building codes. This is related to the subdivision process. So I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read the email. I'll just kind of summarize it quickly. So we play a role in the subdivision land development process. Once an application for a development goes through the Planning Commission, we are the ones who receive the packet of information, the development plans, the permit application, design details, drainage calculations, owner affidavits, bond information, all that kind of stuff comes to our office. Then we go through a process where we do inspections of a site. These are inspections of the infrastructure to be installed, as well as environmental controls. And those environmental controls have value to TDEC. So TDEC does audits on our department to make sure that we completed all of the inspections we needed to do relating to environmental controls. The other information, the details of the infrastructure to be installed, that relates to roads and drainage systems. So that could have a bearing on, like Mr. McBride mentioned earlier, a flood, for example. So we might want to retain that information to prove that we required a development to install adequate flood control. In the end, we receive bond information and something called an as-built that describes what was actually installed on a site. So at the moment, we're actually retaining these records, and I think we've got them back to the 80s as well. We retain this entire file for 7 years after the as-built has been received and the project is closed. And we retain that as a hard copy, and then we send that over to Jeff Beals at Records Management. He will scan it, and we keep it electronically. And at the moment, we really don't know how long to keep it. We've just been keeping it. And I couldn't find much in the CTAS schedule that really describes how long we should be keeping this information. And I was hoping to get, and this may be a longer discussion perhaps with the law department, I was trying to find out whether the section 19-005 that describes plan and plat records would relate to these kind of documents that we're receiving.
Kathy,
Yes.
a question. You said these were sent over to us. Are these that you're referring to now the as-built that we get from codes, or are you referring to another document series? When you
Sure,
say
we hold all of the, sorry. We hold all of this information as a file, a project file, and that would include all of the information that would relate to a certain development, including the design plans, the inspection records, the bond information, and the as-built. So we kind of retain all of that as one packet of information. And this is the data that we would send over to you a few years ago in boxes, and you would scan everything and then destroy it and then send us the electronic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the CTAS records retention schedule seems to relate, it describes plat records, and the plat is something that is documented partway through the subdivision process. The as-built would contain a little bit more information about elevations and materials and sizes for infrastructure that's installed in that location.
Well, to speak to the plat, I think that the Register of Deeds would house the plat, so the final plat. So I don't know that that's something that you need to retain, but I would think that an important question on the records that you're talking about, especially with the drainage and things, is how often does Mr. Snowden and the county hydrologist, how often do they go back into records 10, 15, 20 years ago? I think that's more important than what the CTAS actual retention schedule is.
Right, and my interpretation of that would be that we would want to maintain that for as long as we possibly could, because we go back oftentimes. We go back to the as-built, but we also go back to the design plans to find evidence of what we required of a developer. So all of that information for us has I would say permanent value. Yeah,
I would think so too. Just what little I have to deal with that and call over to the highway department. It's invaluable information when you have a problem come up.
Yeah.
So
a subset of that, I'm sorry.
that's right, Kathy. So I just wanted to make sure. So is your question just the period of time? So everybody seems to be in agreement. It's a permanent record.
Okay.
If that's, then my next question is, are you also asking about how that's stored? So you receive it in a variety of different formats. You maintain it for a period of time, and then you box it up and you send it to Jeff for him to scan and create an electronic record of that entire file.
Yes. And
Okay.
would electronic records be sufficient for the retention of this?
Now we're really making Zach pull his hair out, because once we get to that permanent record issue, he's got to make sure that you have some equipment that would be able to access it. So I would say at least until we adopt, either as a county or Half County Commission, adopt a formal electronic records policy, I think your best bet is to maintain both the hard copy and the electronic at this point in time. Zach, you want to weigh in?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm going to lean on the side of the electronic being sufficient, but I mean, I think you're right, Your Honor. With the absence of a policy, it does open up risk, and not having that locked and loaded does present some concerns. But and I think this is just one of these things that we're just going to have to, grab the bull by the horns and get the policy in and just be prepared to defend it. I've done an extensive amount of research on this. I've spoken with pretty much every major government agency in the state in one form or fashion. Rob and I have done some digging. I've also got a compliance officer on my staff that's done some digging, and we find answers all over the board on this. And most of the municipalities of any size have just decided to interpret it the way they feel like they can defend it, set a policy and go. And I think that's really where we're going to land. I don't see us getting a silver bullet from any organization that gives us an exact perfect roadmap of how to implement this policy. Even CTAS is a little bit, we've dug through their stuff, and there is some guidance, but it's so vast and it's so detailed, it's vague almost. So it's hard to lock it down. And I think my recommendation would be that we just, kind of accept that we're not going to get the answer and come up with our own answer and just be prepared to defend that.
So it seems like where we are today, we have two options. One is to tell Kathy and other departments that are trying to figure out how to store permanent records electronically to go ahead and store the electronic policy. And then if we decide, no, that's not good, that would have to be made into a hard copy, or we say, keep the hard copy and the electronic copy until we do a policy. And that seems to be the two options.
In my opinion there, and again, I'm just my opinion, is that you're really setting yourself up for double work if you don't go ahead and put the policy in, or at least the recommendation in place. So my thought would be we store it in electronic format if that's acceptable, under the law, which seems to be. And then we also have an agreement there that we have a way to make that electronic document not electronic anymore in the event that we have to undo that. And then that becomes the official document. And whether that be, manning a printer for 5 years or whatever the outcome is there, we have a way to do it. As long as we don't lock ourselves into no way. I think, in my opinion, we're okay. But again, I would defer to legal on that interpretation.
Myers, you want to weigh in? Myers, are you there? Myers, I got you muted if you're okay. Myers, going once, going twice. Did we lose you?
Hey, Zach, at some point, I need y'all to show me how to use my mouse to unmute myself.
No worries. I had the same problem early on.
Judge, I'm sorry. I need to do some research.
Okay. All right. So you understand what the question is at this point in time, which is, I think all of us agree that have been looking at this for some period of time. There is not a very clear answer of whether or not a permanent record can be stored electronically. We know that there is value in a lot of our permanent records. And if we have a record that's permanent and something happens, technology down 10 years down the road, can we be sure that we can access it? And that may require some audits, that we do every so often to double check to make sure we're still having accessible, or we convert documents, whatever. That's going to have to be a long-term solution. But for purposes of today, the real question for Kathy is if the Public Works has these records now as hard copies, can they be converted to an electronic record now? And as a matter of policy, have that be an the official record. And if at some point in time when we actually can adopt a formal electronic records policy for the entire county, we say all permanent records have to be hard copies, then those would have to be printed off and maintained in a hard copy format. So that seems to be our two options, is to go electronically now and hope that we come up with the policy that addresses long-term solution, or keep hard copy and electronic copy now until we adopt that policy.
Yes, Your Honor, I understand the question clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. So Kathy, we're going to wait for some further direction from Mr. Morton on that issue.
That sounds great. One thing that I think I would like to do, and perhaps this is work I do later and then submit at a subsequent meeting, is to break down, our file that contains the subdivision plan, the application, the permit, the inspection, the subdivision bonds, the as-built, into different items, because I don't think all of those have permanent retention value. So if I can work through that and work with perhaps Myers or someone up the law department, I would like to present that back to the Records Commission later, if that would be acceptable to everybody.
I'm here. I'll be here for you.
Thank you.
Kathy, just a question. When you say that, are you referring to your retention schedule that you're working on, or is this distinct from that?
I think it would be part of the records retention schedule. It's pretty large at this point, so I'm not really sure. I'm going to have to work with you perhaps on figuring a way to present that to Records Commission for approval.
Because you address a lot of records, and I think it's a really good idea, and I think you've done a lot of good work on it, and I think that would address in a format that people could reference it, of everything we've kind of been discussing. So, yeah.
Jeff, one question, and it may be useful for the group. I mean, the way I've got it worked out is most of our records have backing from CTAS records retention documentation. And so they're pretty much just CTAS says we retain something for this period of time. That's what we're going to do. Where there are, where there is interpretation, or maybe we're varying from the CTAS schedules, that's where I would like to present a particular policy, get that approved by the commission, and then incorporate it into our internal procedure documents.
I think that's the right path.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think we lost our chair.
I think we lost Chair Richie Beeler. You were the first to speak, so you're now the honorary.
Oh, I am not.
Hey, guys. I'm actually on the phone with the judge right now. She got kicked off. Is there a way to get her back on? She sounds desperate.
If she's able to click on the link again, it should just pop her right back in.
Yeah, can you click on the link again?
From her calendar.
From your calendar?
I can send someone down ASAP if need be, if she's.
You tried that and it didn't work? Access the nod? Oh, access denied, she said.
Oh, access denied. Okay, she in her chambers?
Yeah, are you in your chambers? Okay, they're sending someone to get you out. Just hang on.
5 minute recess. We'll be right there.
Yeah, he said he'll send somebody down there. That work? Oh, that's okay. That's it. Okay. All right. She's waiting on.
Nick, I think you're thinking like I am, but hearing Kathy, it's just, and Jeff, same thing too. It's so scary thinking about, getting rid of some of those records like that, because it can save the county millions of dollars in the long run. So I'm sure that, Myers can research that, but sometimes, CTAS is what we fall back on, and that's that's guidance. But that doesn't mean that has to be the final say here in Knox County. If we feel like that we need a little more time with it or whatever, I think that's that's doable maybe. And that's why we have this records commission and trying to figure out, is what works for us here.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And I'm sitting here in the back of my mind, and I'm trying to think of how many pages might be in each one of those files, because I know we can, make microfilm at about 2 cents per page. And, and you can store a lot of microfilm in one cabinet, as you well know, Sherry.
Yeah.
Because the value of those records, and I had no idea we had those back to 84, because I have lots of people ask me, they're wanting to see the plans and, why something was done. And so
Now that
fact that there's an expense, and I sure would just hate to see a department head or a director or somebody, oh, well, we'll just get rid of all this, don't need it. And then the law department has nothing to defend the county
I
on.
could see a lot of the other people.
now, to be clear on that, we have the commercial plans back to 84, residential back to 2009.
Okay.
So, and if you ever need anything, Nick, you just you can holler at me or
Wrong offer, Jeff. Wrong.
What's that?
Wrong offer. He knows where they're at now. He'll be over there. He will. But yeah, microfilm, and this goes back to, I remember, being on this records commission and Judge Workman talking about it, Judge Stephen's predecessor, and just how were these digital records, what can we depend on, how much, we don't know about how long they'll last now. But microfilm is always, that's old school or whatever, but it is dependable. I mean, it is something that we know that we can rely on.
And they're still making that pretty good?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. And we're still microfilming our records on the back end. We're sending TIFF files to National Underground Storage, and they're making microfilm. And I mean, we've probably got 5 to 10 million images at National Underground Storage right now. And I think my annual cost for storage is about 5,000 or 6,000. So, something to think about.
Yeah.
I know the county historian would be all for microfilm versus not having any records at all.
We still use it every day.
I will say I'm happy to explore the cost, but if you're talking, so basically in the digital storage world, and again, I have no preference either way. It's the pleasure of the board. I'm happy to do whatever, but I will say this: the cost of digital storage directly is related to the accessibility or speed of that storage. For instance, like a database or something used actively that needs to be very fast, and its access is a lot more expensive than what they call a cold storage. Things that are accessed very, very rarely or sit just in a a file structure somewhere and you may never access it. You just need it there for archival sake. So the cost goes way down if these records are not accessed often. Way down, like per terabyte storage gets, you know, in the pennies. If it's very, very, very cold storage, meaning, hey, I need this, it may take 10 minutes to get it, versus I need it to be readily accessible, read, write instantly in a database type thing. There's different tiers of that. So if we can afford the time, then the cost will go down dramatically. Just something to consider.
Yeah, because I think what we're talking about, all these records, I don't think that there's, you know, that anybody has to have them immediately. I mean, you could, if it's a day or two, then that's plenty of time.
Yeah, it won't be a day. So, I mean, yeah, obviously that doesn't work for like a website. You can't have a, hey, I'm clicking on the next record and it's a day or two it pulls up. But for stuff like this, it works.
No, yeah, I'm just talking about something on the back end that, you know, maybe the highway department, you know, they've got a file over there and yeah, a terabyte or whatever, and they can just keep those records as long as they want. But, you know, the ability of Jim to be able to get to those records at some times is just invaluable.
Yeah, and I think that's something we could definitely work out in policy. And I just want to make sure that we're aware that I'm not saying the cost of maintaining a live database with all of the stuff accessible, readily accessible, will be substantial. But the cost of just having it there, long-term storage can get especially now that we're both partners in our Gov tenant with Microsoft and Amazon. The Amazon cost is actually less, the AWS cost. Now that said, is it the bait and switch where it's super cheap now and, you know, in years to come, they jack the price up to, you know, but who knows? I can't, you know, obviously can't predict that, but there are multiple big players in the market. So I find that very unlikely.
I will, Mrs. Myers, I will add that open records responses, it's days before we have to respond. So if that's one of the issues.
Yeah, it's just obviously not something you would want for like long-term, say, criminal records or something that you might need on the fly. Like, hey, I've got somebody pulled over and I need to access this record. But you might not care about like property records or things that, you know, obviously the process is going to take days to even flush out. So just want to throw it out there. And if you guys want to go microfilm, I'm fine with whatever and I'll support, but I wanted to make sure that the cost of long-term storage, if it's truly long-term storage, is probably not a factor that is really, you know, that big of a consideration.
Yeah, that's good to know. I'd never heard the term cold storage. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy and I can show you some of the stuff, but there's levels of the cold. It's like, and I don't even know the term, but they're kind of crazy. It's like ice cold and super cold, and there's levels of how cheap you want to get with the storage and how accessible it needs to be.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, and not meaning to change subjects, but in the conversations we've had today, it's amazing how many copies of one record we have in this building or over at archives. And I don't know
the same record.
Yeah, the same record. We've got it, you know, 10 different places. I don't know when we're ever going to get to a point where we can streamline.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question on that real quick, and not to beat the dead horse there, but Judge, I know you've every time I come to you, you start our conversations with, I can't give you legal advice, and I'm not asking for legal advice, so we'll just start there, and assume that's there. But just anyone's opinion or interpretation of when a document processes from down the chain of being completed, from filling out from a hard copy to an electronic copy to it's signed and then it's countersigned. At that point, does each step along the way then replace the previous version of the document, and the previous version is then no longer an official copy? Like how does that work legally? Even if it's especially if it's jumping from one form to another.
Well, if Myers, if somebody says, I never did that, I never promised to do that, I never drew that up, it becomes very relevant that, yeah, there's a document that exists that shows they did do that.
Well, my point is, let's say I've got a contract and it's executed by the mayor, and then it's fully executed by the other side because it goes usually back to the person originating the document. At that point, if the mayor has a copy that he executed, that he holds on to, that's got his actual signature on it, then they fully execute on the other side. Does the fully executed document now become the official, and the one that the mayor had that's not fully executed then becomes just another copy? How does that work as far as the life cycle of a document?
You're making me think, Zach.
Sorry, Myers.
No, it's job security. One question is the context of the question. You know, if there's a contract that one side draws up and signs it and sends it back to the other, and they sign it, and then in a year or two or three, and we start litigating, they're different. Somebody changed it. It's pretty relevant evidence on who sent what to whom and when. But think of that in the context of the requirement that we have to keep all our records.
Exactly. Retaining the record. Which one has to be retained, or does every single revision from the birth of the document have to be? That's kind of what I'm concerned about.
And I'm looking forward to doing some research and reporting back. This is a good question.
Okay, fair enough.
Sorry, Commission, can I ask one more question, please? This is Kathy Olson.
Sure, Kathy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties here. One moment. Okay, sorry. So I was wondering what the balance would be from the Commission's point of view on open records accessibility versus records retention. Should we be attempting to keep everything? And then if we keep everything, is everything subject to open records requests? And is that the direction that the law department wants us to go in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's exactly what I'm thinking. First of all, you understand my perspective is thinking worst case scenarios. And I'm doing that now, but I don't have an answer for you, Kathy, immediately.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have typically taken the position that the official documents, you know, for example, if county commission takes action on approving a contract, then that's the contract that is being approved, and then it is signed and executed. That becomes the official document. If there were earlier iterations of it, it doesn't really matter because that's not what was approved by county commission. Same thing's true when you're dealing with records from the Board of Zoning Appeals. If it was something that the Board of Zoning Appeals relied on in making its decision, then that's an important part of the record. If it was a document that you kept in your desk with your personal notes on something and you never sent it as part of the file with the Board of Zoning Appeals, it wasn't considered when it was approved, so it can't be part of the official record. Now, we get murkier when we start talking about, you know, planning records, and do you have to keep the original record of that was sent in initially, and then you decide that maybe the drainage issue is a problem and they have to go back and redo it. And you do that 15 times, do all 15 iterations of that planning document need to be kept? And I'd say at this point in time, the answer to that question is probably yes. But I think we probably need to spend some time fleshing it out. And I think Nick's absolutely right. You know, there's legal issues of, it would be great to have a document that, you know, from the beginning of time, but we also have to address issues of costs, accessibility, storage. If we have documents that nobody knows where they are and how would we get to them, then they're not particularly useful for anybody, whether you're dealing with a record retention policy or whether you're dealing with an open records request. So the idea is both for record retention and for open records that we have a unified system of where we could find something, who's responsible for keeping it, and what needs to be kept. And, you know, like I said, when you're dealing with commission decisions, that's a lot easier than when you're dealing with every different department's decision on, you know, whether they're going to buy a new computer piece of equipment. And so I think that's hopefully what we're going to address over the next year is kind of where does that balance lie between keeping electronic records, storage copies, hard copies, and the official record so that it makes sense for the citizens of the county as well as the county, and it's accessible. Myers, would you agree with that statement?
Yes, Your Honor, and I was taking copious notes. Thank you.
All righty. Anything else we need to cover? Kathy?
I think I've covered all of my points. I had a question that I'd posed to Jeff earlier regarding our grant documentation, but I think I've got that sorted out from discussion with finance. So
All right.
thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being with us. All right. Anybody else have any other business we need to cover? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
All right. I got a motion and a second. I guess we roll call vote. Sherry,
aye.
Nick,
Aye.
Zach,
Aye.
Mr. Baylor,
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
All right. And I. So I think, Jeff, do we know when our next meeting is yet?
No.
All right. Well, keep posted. We'll let you know. I think the mayor is looking at the archivist position and whether that will need to be refilled and filled in by whom. And so hopefully we'll have another member by our next meeting. Hopefully we'll all be healthy and vaccinated by the time we get to our next meeting. But it may be by Zoom or it may be in person. But I appreciate everybody's working with us today, and I apologize for the fact that the IT department decided to cut me off.
I had a timer set, Judge. You got me. We got places to be.
I understand. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Take care.